Hello, this is Garrett Keane again. In this video, I'm going to look at the last of these questions. Calculate and output the largest of three numbers. So you have a frame here called, I actually haven't named this frame, so we'll name it now. FRA maximum 3. It has the caption maximum of three numbers. You can see it here, maximum of three numbers. We have a text box, text number 1. Now once again, to avoid conflict, I call that text num 1. I call that text num 1 in letters. So I'll call this text number 1, text number 2, text number 3. I have the button command calculate maximum 3, and I have a label here called label result 3 where I'm going to output the maximum value. Now this code is an example of nested if blocks. So if I say num1 as a single, num2 as a single, num3 as a single precision. I also define max as a single. Then in this code, I basically have to read in num1 is equal to text number 1.text, num2 is equal to text number 2.text, num3 is equal to text number 3.text. Then you have selection section. And it's basically if num1 is greater than num2, then we have an else here and an end if here. So I put the skeleton of the if block in there. And then what I have here is I press the space bar in there. So what this else, I'll put a comment in here to indicate that what this means. I can put a comment after that by putting the quotation mark. In other words, num1 is greater than num2. So if num1 is greater than num2, we're going to go into the code between here and here. Otherwise, if that's not true, that means num2 is greater than num1. We come in here. Okay, now what we have it nested in here, so I space in 1, 2, is another if block. And this time we say, well, if num1 is greater than num2, the next test we test is if num1 is greater than num3. Then, well, if it's greater than num1 and it's greater than num2, it must be the maximum number. So I say max is equal to num1. Otherwise, the max has to be equal to num3. Because logically, if num1 is greater than num2, but it's not greater than num3, that means num1 is in the middle, num2 is the smallest number, num3 is the biggest number. Okay, so we do something similar down here, but this time we test if num2 is greater than num3, then max is num2. So if you think about it, I'll do the whole lot of it first, else max is equal to num3. We have an end if here to close it off. So this is known as a nested if block. You have one if block, say, running from here to here, nested inside an outer if block. Likewise, this section here, this if block, is nested inside this, under the else section of this outer one. Now, if you look at it logically, let's pick some numbers. I can run through it with the F8 button, and I pick three numbers. So say I pick, first number is the biggest, so say I pick, that's 20, 10, 5. And I go in, calculate maximum. I'm going to print down here, print num1, num2, num3. At the moment is 0, 0, 0. So I come in here and I read the three of them in, I print them out, and you can see num1 is 20, num2 is 10, num3 is 5. So if num1 is greater than num2, that should be true because 20 is greater than 10. It comes into the inner if block. It's true, so it comes in here. Then we'll test if num1 is greater than num3, well 20 is greater than 5. That's true, so we'll assign num1 into the variable max. It skips down to the end of, and then it skips down to this end of. Okay, now I never put out the answer here, so the result 3 dot caption is equal to max. I can put the maximum is max like that. So if I pull this back up here and F8 and F8, you can see it's printed out the maximum is 20. Now if I try a new one, so I'll put it so that num2 is the biggest number, or actually I'll do so that num3 is that num2 is 1 and that's 10. So we have it that num2 is the lowest number, number 1 is the second number, and number 3 is the maximum number. So if I click in here, I go F8, I read the 3 of them in, I'll just clear it here, and you can see that num1 is in the middle, num2 is the smallest, num3 is the largest. So it'll ask here, if num1 is greater than num2, well it's true, isn't it? 8 is greater than 1, so it comes in here, and now it tests, is num1 greater than num3? 8 is not greater than 10, therefore it's false, so it skips to the else, and it will set the maximum number to 3. It comes down here, skips down to the end of, skips out of here. Once it finds one that's true, it skips down to the end, and it says the maximum is maximum. If I click out, you can see it's picked the maximum is equal to 10. So now let's pick another one where num3 in that case was the biggest, so I'll change the order. We'll have num2 as the biggest, and we'll have num3 as the middle one. And num1 now is the smallest, so let's see where that brings us. F8, read the 3 of them in. So if I just delete those and do it again. So num1 is the smallest, num2 is the largest, num3 is the middle. So is num1 greater than num2? It's false, so it skips down to the else statement. Then it comes in and says, is num2 greater than num3? Yes it is. Therefore we'll say max is equal to, it'll assign num2 into max, skips down to the end of, skips to the end of, and comes in here and says the maximum is equal to the second value there. You can see it's worked correctly. So you can see this algorithm. This algorithm is another word for structure or code. It actually works that it'll always capture using nested if blocks, it'll always capture the correct value, the largest value of the 3. Okay, thank you for listening.